Selection, and it says, they called her Molly Pitcher. It's a story about a very famous American figure who participated in the American Revolution. She was called Molly Pitcher. And now let's start. They called her Molly Pitcher. During the American Revolution, many men joined the army. Some of their wives and children went with them and lived in army camps. Among these women was Molly Pitcher. So she's a woman who joined her husband in the army. She moved with him and she lived in army camps. They both participated in the American Revolution. She traveled with her husband and she suffered from the same difficulties as the soldiers whom she tried to help. In They Called Her Molly Pitcher, you will learn about one woman who traveled with her husband and assisted the soldiers during a battle. Her actions helped save lives. So she's a woman, and as I said before, she traveled with her husband. She managed to assist the soldiers during the battle or during the fight. She really was a great help to the soldiers. She really saved many lives. The story also highlights what people experienced on the battlefield during the American Revolution. The story also shows the experiences or the difficulties that the people went through during the American Revolution. Who is Molly Pitcher? Molly Pitcher was a wife to a barber named William Hayes. Her name is Mary and her nickname is Molly. In 1777, William closed up shop and joined George Washington's Continental Army in Pennsylvania to participate in the revolution against England. Like many women of the time, Molly went with him. The introductory paragraph. Actually, the first paragraph in the story, it serves as an introduction. So the story starts with an introduction in which the author is informing the readers with a background information on William Hayes and his wife Molly. The author also wanted to show that ordinary men, not trained professionals like William, made up Washington's army. So the author also tackles the idea that normal men, not professional soldiers, they form up Washington's army, and instead of that, they managed to win the war. The American army. George Washington, along with his army, about 12,000 soldiers, they camped at Valley Forge, where they have been training to fight. What conditions did the American soldiers suffer from in their camp at Valley Forge? It was so cold that the soldiers had to stand on their hats in the snow to keep their feet from freezing. They had no blankets, no warm clothes. Many of them were very sick. They didn't have enough to eat, and their camp was a filthy mess. So it was very cold. They had no blankets, no food, or not enough food, and their camp was a total mess. A lot of soldiers deserted and others died. How did Molly and other women who had followed their husbands, sons, or fathers try to help? They cooked and cleaned and nursed the sick. But no matter what they did, more soldiers died each day because of the hard conditions. The battle at Monmouth Courthouse. At the end of June, a large number of British soldiers led by Sir Henry Clinton, they were gathered at Monmouth Courthouse near New Jersey shore. What details in the text show that both armies are preparing for another battle? So what exactly the details in the text that show that the two armies, the English and the American, are preparing for a fight? The British are gathering at Monmouth Courthouse. The British are moving to Monmouth Courthouse. And Washington is sending an advance guard of 5,000 soldiers to attack the British. And George Washington is sending an advance guard of, at the first step, 5,000 soldiers to attack the British. William Hayes, followed by his wife Molly, were among the advance guard marching to the battle. So Molly and Hayes were a part of, or they were members of, these soldiers that were sent as a first step to the battle. George Washington would send more men soon after fighting was underway, and after that, George Washington would send more soldiers. The battle at Monmouth Courthouse. How was the weather in New Jersey in June? So, unlike Forge Valley, the weather in New Jersey was hotter than anyone could remember. Unlike the British, the Americans know all about such hot summer days, but the Americans were familiar with these conditions or this hot weather. How did Molly try to help the soldiers in the battlefield? She found a water spring on her own and she decided to carry on the exhausting job of carrying the water in her pitcher to the soldiers. Molly found a water spring and she decided to carry the water in her pitcher, that is her pitcher, to the American soldiers during the war. What does her actions tell about her? Molly Pitcher is courageous and hard working. She's willing to risk her life to help her husband and Washington's soldiers. What's the reason behind calling her as Molly Pitcher? Why was she called Molly Pitcher? All morning, Molly ran back and forth from battlefield to water spring, bringing water to men who had collapsed in the heat. The soldiers kept calling her to bring the pitcher of the water to them, and that's why they shortened the request to Molly Pitcher. So, the phrase Molly Pitcher, it was a request from the soldiers for water during the war or during the battle. Under orders, the English Lord Cornwallis, more British soldiers marched to the courthouse. What happened to the British soldiers? The Englishmen had never felt such heat in their home. They had never experienced such hot weather. They couldn't stand the heat and some of them died, but still other soldiers continued to march, continued to gather to the courthouse. What conclusion can you draw from their actions? What did these actions tell about them? One conclusion that can be drawn is that they were very determined to defeat the colonists. They were very determined to win the battle. Also, they may have been under strict orders not to stop fighting for any reason. Maybe they were under very strict orders for not to stop fighting for any reason. The unbearable heat didn't stop the British soldiers. More and more soldiers marched onto the field. How did the American soldiers react at the sight of so many British soldiers? What was the reaction of the American soldiers when they encountered the great number of the British soldiers? They panicked. General Lee, who was responsible for the American army, he couldn't keep them in order, but still other soldiers continued to march. How did General Lee react? He gave orders to the American soldiers to retreat, so he asked the American soldiers to go back or to withdraw. How did the American soldiers react to General Lee's orders? What was the American soldiers' reaction? Some of them, including William, they disobeyed the orders and they kept fighting. Molly kept providing the men with the water they need. How was Molly's participation in the battle of a great help to the American soldiers? On one of Molly's trips to provide water, she risked her life to save a wounded American soldier. So while Molly was providing water to the soldiers, she risked her life to save a wounded American soldier. She slung him over her shoulder and she moved him away from the gunfire. Her husband got injured as well during the process. She ensured that he would survive his injury and took over his job to fire the cannon. So after that, her husband got injured. He made sure that he would survive his injury and that it's all okay. And she took over his job and she kept firing the cannon. What do Molly's actions tell you about her character? She's brave. She seems to have a strong sense of duty. She dedicated herself to help others. George Washington arrived at the battlefield carrying the flag of the American colonists, and now George Washington arrived with the rest of the soldiers. How did the soldiers feel about Washington's arrival? The soldiers look up to Washington. When he rides onto the field, the entire mood changes. Soldiers cheer and then they continue the fighting with renewed spirit. George Washington was amazed to notice Molly firing the cannon. Why did General Washington ask his officers about Molly Pitcher? He is curious about her. He might be planning to acknowledge her efforts in some way. So he might be planning to acknowledge or to tell the other soldiers about her efforts or the great things that she had done. George Washington decided that Molly had earned the rank of a sergeant in the Continental Army, so now Molly is a sergeant in the Continental Army. What does George Washington's action tell about his characters? He's not afraid to break traditions and acknowledge Molly's bravery. So he's not afraid of the traditions and the rules, to acknowledge that a woman is brave. He believes in rewarding good work. He believes that hardworking people should be rewarded no matter they were women or men. And now let's move to the end of the battle. In the morning after Molly and other American soldiers they were ready to fight again, many believed they could win. They believed that they could really win. However, they found that the British had gone away, but the British had retreated. Sir Henry Clinton and Lord Cornwallis they had ordered a retreat, so they surrendered and ordered a retreat. And now let's move to the genre. What is the genre of the text? It's a narrative nonfiction. What does a narrative nonfiction story tell? It tells about real people, places, and events. What does a narrative nonfiction text include? It includes events in time order, information that are told as a story, and illustrations that help convey ideas from the text. That's it for today. Thank you so much. See you in the next video.